5 miles, Angel 6.
Roger, that's the only one I've got right there where the pointer is.
Well, welcome back to the DCS SITREP. I'm your host, Prickly Hedgehog, and here we are at another DCS SITREP on a Monday, looking at last week's newsletter from Eagle Dynamics, which featured some pretty interesting goodies, starting with the announcement of a new Red 4 aircraft, which looks quite far along in development. This is the MiG-17 by Red Star Simulations, I believe it is. And that team has been quietly working on this module for some time, to the point where people were asking me, is the project even alive? And earlier this year, I did discover that that project is indeed alive and well. And here we are, a proper plug from Eagle Dynamics and showcasing some of the work involved in that particular aircraft. So we'll come back to that in just a second. Radars are kind of a feature right now in Eagle Dynamics' DCS world, particularly with the third-party developers Razbam. And here I'm referencing the major updates that the Mirage 2000C has had with their radar, and also the work that carried on from that into the F-15E, which has been particularly impressive. If you haven't seen any of the videos on that particular radar, I do suggest you check it out, because it is going to be something of a benchmark for radars in the game. And indeed, there was a plug by Baltic Dragon recently revealing one of the training missions on the F-15E's radar, which will be released as part of the introduction of the aircraft into the game, which looked particularly promising. So I will throw that link in below. But as a result, I think it's interesting here that Eagle Dynamics also mentioned that their own F-16 and F-18 are also receiving some interesting injections of technology, if you like, or updates to their radars as well. So I don't know if that is a coincidence or whether or not ED is sort of paying attention to what's being done on the F-15E and whether or not any of that translates into work being done for the F-18. I would not be surprised. It could be coincidence in terms of the overall development, but it was, I guess, an interesting collision of different aircraft and the potency of radar systems in the game receiving a little bit more attention, which was exciting. So again, we'll come back to that in just a sec. Lastly, the newsletter rounded out here was with this new campaign by SorelRo, the Huey Last Show campaign, and that is, of course, featuring the Huey, which also received a little bit of an update a few weeks ago. It sort of slipped under the radar, continuing a theme there. And the Huey has received a major engine update. So that's a nice time, if you like, or nice timing for both the new campaign for Huey fans, and also do check out the updates that have been signaled for this aircraft, which is long overdue, actually, for some attention. Now, something that didn't make the newsletter was the Polychop announcement over the weekend, which was a bit of a bombshell, and that is a major overhaul of the Gazelle. And the Gazelle has been around in game for quite some time and was one of those modules that was a little bit meh, didn't quite hit it out of the park when it came to, you know, being a go-to helicopter simulation. So I'm very looking forward to seeing what they've done here with this, and hopefully what should be an upcoming patch for that. And we're talking here a complete rework of the flight model. Now, some of you will say, well, good and well, what about the Kiowa? Sadly, no more news on that. Fingers crossed that this is an indication of the team's work, though. But it seems to me that a lot of aircraft, because of certain developments in areas such as the Mi-24P, the Apache, and of course the Black Shark, have received a lot of extra attention over the last few months, which has been very, very positive indeed. So stay tuned for more information on the Gazelle as it comes to hand, because I'm looking forward to trying it out, seeing what it means for this particular helicopter, because it is a scouting helicopter, reminiscent, if you like, a little bit smaller than perhaps the Kiowa, but nonetheless a similar kind of function. So stay tuned, like I said, for more information. Let's switch back then to this MiG-17 and what it all means. As I said, it is by Red Star Simulations. It is still a work in progress, but as I mentioned, we have seen some more comprehensive information from the team. As most of you probably will know, the MiG-17 is a subsonic fighter. Of course, it was developed by the Soviet Union way back in the 1950s. Unfortunately, there weren't enough of them. It wasn't quite in development far enough for it to see action in the Korean War. Actually, probably more fortunate than anything. But it was designed to overcome some of the speed issues, high-speed issues that the Soviet developers encountered with the MiG-15. And it was also the first Soviet jet fighter to actually have an afterburner in it, which also improved its performance. So it became one of the more successful transonic fighters ever developed, and it was released into the Vietnam conflict, where it performed pretty well and caused some consternation for the tight quarter dogfight tactics that it was capable of, as well as ambush. And that meant some problems for both the American pilots and the European Union countries, who had to reevaluate their own aerial tactics to combat the speed and the turning capability of the MiG-17. Now, the understanding I have is that generally the American pilots would try to use speed over the maneuverability of the MiG-17 and avoid getting into rate fights with it. Nonetheless, the introduction of the MiG-17, and in some cases being flown by Soviet pilots, apparently, during the conflict, demanded essentially that the Americans come up with some new tactics, and this forced the development of the Navy Fighter Weapons School, also known as Top Gun, of course, and also the US Air Force Weapons School, which were designed to teach pilots air-to-air combat tactics based on the lessons learned from the Vietnam era. Essentially, it's, some of the tactics went away because of the development of things like missiles. Air-to-air missiles that were seen as more reliable than perhaps getting into gunfights. Well, invariably, missiles failed to launch, didn't hit the target, and so guns kills was still very much a part of the modern fighter jet world. And this was a harsh lesson that was learned by the Americans during the Vietnam conflict. Indeed, according to the news blurb here, the F-16 Viper was a direct result of the lessons learned in Vietnam, trying to combat that maneuverable MiG-17. So it's no coincidence that the F-16 was also the first fighter jet that was actually able to outrate the MiG-17.
So Venom, hook left.
So that kind of indicates where things were at. And it's hard to believe now that the F-16 is still flying in the skies and is still regarded as one of the greatest BFM fighters of the modern era, which is rapidly going into stealth technology and a slightly different focus, but nonetheless, it is still one of the aircraft by which all other aircraft are measured in terms of BFM capability. Now, the Red Star Simulations module is headed by two pilots, apparently. This has been brought up in previous interviews, I believe, when the aircraft was first announced. I think it was Grim Reaper's Cap did an interview with them. The focus was to basically get a highly accurate flight dynamic for the aircraft, and they have been able to use Soviet wind tunnel test data and performance manuals, and also US testing results from a captured MiG-17F, plus the aid of several current MiG-17 pilots. The MiG-17F LIM-5 module for DCS has been developed with the most realistic simulated flight dynamics ever produced on a MiG-17 plane. So that's the theory behind the module. We shall see what it looks like in game, but here are some of the key features that we should expect to see in game. So turn and climb performance 0 to 40,000 plus feet, dynamic stall and flap performance slow speed, high AOA drag, high G drag, and a fully dynamic engine, speed, altitude, and thrust performance parameters. Other key features for the aircraft will be the ASP-4N gun sight with the SRD-1M gun radar, SPO-2 Sirena RWR, SRO-2 Crom, I think that's how you say it, IFF, ARC-5 ADF radio and navigation, standard and Egyptian upgrade weapons. Cool, all right. And that will round out what we have thus far about the plane. So stay tuned for more news about this aircraft as it comes to hand, and as we hopefully will get some sort of timeline for when it's going to be released, so we all know how that can go. All right, radar development for the F-18 and the F-16. Again, I find this an interesting coincidence with all the radar work going on in the F-15E. So what is Eagle Dynamics saying about their new radar models? Well, Phase 1, they're calling it, of their new radar model provides more realistic radar target detection and tracking in different modes of operation. It incorporates many new features like signal-to-noise ratio calculations that determine a target's detection range, signal-to-clutter ratio, and receiver dynamic range calculations. The latter accounts for the unique aspects of different waveforms. So velocity search, or VS, and range-while search, or RWS, both include high pulse repetition frequency, HPRF waveforms. However, RWS provides range measurement because it uses frequency modulation, or FM ranging, that also results in a loss of sensitivity. So the new model that they're building here accounts for such losses, and detection range depends on the type of FM waveform. HPRF modes can only detect closing targets. Detection of low aspect targets are generally limited by strong side lobe clutter. The medium pulse repetition frequency, or MPRF mode, has 8 distinct waveforms. Whereas the use of so many waveforms causes a proportional reduction in the signal-to-noise ratio, thus a reduction in the detection range relative to HPRF, it does provide all-aspect target detection aside from beaming targets that may be obscured by main lobe clutter. So the Phase 1 of the new model accounts for these effects and faithfully models the detection range ratio between HPRF and MPRF modes. So kind of two things going on there. One is the ability of the radar to detect targets depending on the mode that it is in, as well as taking into account the counter effects, if you like, of aircraft notching or going into beam to avoid or make it more difficult for the radar to be able to detect the enemy aircraft or the target aircraft or target aircrafts. So that is good news, I think, and a definite improvement, I should think, to what is currently available. It will be a less eye of God kind of situation, and being able to detect regardless of tactics. That should hopefully, I would think, make it more difficult potentially for pilots to get an unfettered lock on a particular target. This is going to be particularly helpful for multiplayer environments. Now, they go on here and say that another new feature is an adjustable speed gate option, which will provide the ability to select the width of the main beam clutter notch filter that adjusts the threshold of minimal radial velocity that can be detected. This may assist in filtering unwanted slow targets. So upon Phase 1 release and tuning, they will implement Phase 2, which will include the effect of radar azimuth and bar settings on detection ranges and the inclusion of more accurate look-down radar performance. So that's an exciting addition, and as I said, there definitely is some work afoot here from, I think, in many respects, the work that Razbam has done. But I'm very interested to see how this parallels with what ED is intending here and what they are working on, if whether there was any correlation or communication between the two teams regarding the work, whether it was just something that kind of coincidentally came up or whether it was just something that ED was still working on in the background. I don't really know. I just can't help but think with the F-15E's radar and the work that was done by that team that there hasn't been some sort of spillover into the ED environment pure, which I think is really cool regardless. So yeah, let me know what you think of that and how that's going to affect your ability to lock on to targets, etc., etc. Again, I think it's going to be particularly interesting in the multiplayer environment and might provide a little bit more frustration perhaps for those Eye of God kind of situations where you're more than likely to pick things up. This might mean, I think, a little bit more rummaging around into the settings to get the best out of the radar, which would be a little bit more realistic. Again, very difficult things to recreate based on available data and general secrecy, but any kind of improvement in this area for realism, I think, is a huge bonus for immersion in the game, and I applaud what the various teams are doing here to bring us these, again, simulated systems for immersion and realism processes and effects, which I think is cool. All right, we mentioned the Huey, which is one of the last things on the ED newsletter. So this is the last show campaign by SorelRo, like I mentioned before. It is a 15-mission story-based campaign. It's going to have over 2,000 voiceovers, and you're going to see late 1970s units in the game. It is a full-scale conflict which will progress through the campaign, and you will be required to complete various missions, including SAR, rescue cap, gunship, transport, SOC ops. Also included are detailed briefings, kneeboard files, and supporting documentation for each mission. So stay tuned for the upgraded airborne radar for the new Huey as well. That is coming to an upcoming DCS open beta patch. So again, more really good news from the ED team. Now, as I mentioned before, Polychop is doing some incredible updates to the Gazelle, and they are describing here in the Facebook page that they have that this is going to be one of several iterations for the Gazelle, and it started out apparently as a flight model update, and I guess went a little bit beyond that as well. So it's quite a wide-ranging scope of fixes and updates that they are working. They're also trying to consolidate some of the various versions of the aircraft out there. The Mistral, for example, has become redundant and is now available only as an AI aircraft to ensure mission capability for mission creators. The SA-342 Gazelle has essentially been absorbed by the SA-342L, which is now much more modular in form and is able to be outfitted with the Mistral ATAM system. They're asking mission creators to be aware of this change and update their multiplayer missions accordingly. They apologize for the inconvenience to the work that they're doing here. So this is going to be the changelog that is common to all SA-342. They've updated the external textures to PBR standard, which is exciting. They've added raindrops on the canopy, huzzah. Interior lighting and reflections have been updated. The flight model has been entirely rewritten. They have overhauled the engine and rotor behaviors. They've updated the mass and the payload mass parameters. They've added many new behaviors, including added or reworked ground effect, flat back, blowback, retreating blade stall and density, altitude, and effective transitional lift as well, known as ETL. Engine surge effect from rapid collective movement has been added. They've also added force feedback support. They've removed easier controls as a special option. They've removed rudder trimmer special option. This has been replaced with new trim options. The new trim options basically have changed the cyclette and pedal behavior, especially when using force trim interrupt. So in a nutshell, the trimmer system has been, and trimmer reset systems have been completely redone. They've applied upon recentering trim positions, which will apply instantly only when the cyclic pedal position is recentered. They've updated the controls indicators. So red marker shows control position, gray marker shows trim position. Autopilot markers have been removed for further consideration. They've added network animations. They've implemented IFF panels, which has limited functionality. They've updated the autopilot system. Airspeed, altitude, hold modes removed for further consideration. Auto collective has been removed for further consideration. They've added light indicators for auto hover, CSV, and heading align, ALV, autopilot modes. Autopilot master switch will not engage or will engage if pitch, roll, or yaw SAS is disabled. They've added a smoke display system. Smoke launchers can be equipped in the rearm refuel screen, and they now have a new input to toggle on and off. The collective can be hidden by clicking on the base of the collective. We've seen that with other aircrafts. They've added tablet navigation aid. Tablet can be disabled from the mission editor, and the tablet provides map, heading, airspeed, and ground speed GPS information. Cool. The tablet is disabled and visible in missions where the date is set prior to April of 1994. Earlier, they've updated the slip wall to be less erratic, and the fuel warning light now flickers if below 80 liters, which could indicate you're in trouble. So for the SA-342L, they've added new weapons, including the Mistral, the Hot 3, the HMP 400 gun pods, a selectable GIAT M621 20mm. They replaced the Vivian screen with a periscope sight. The Vivian control panel has been replaced with a periscope control board. This periscope system provides 2 zoom levels, toggleable gyro stabilization, selectable reticles for estimating distance, connected to Viz mode on artificial horizon. Is the same as Vivian. Pilot sight can be hidden by clicking on mounting of the pilot sight. AI-controlled aircraft now able to fire Hot 3 missiles. They've added ground crew option to remove the doors. Cool. They've added options to shoot multiple pylons if the weapon is from the same type. We have the SA-342M. Vivian camera control has been overhauled, and the multi-crew synchronization has been improved, and the AI-controlled aircraft is now able to fire Hot 3 missiles. The Mistral, they've removed the playable version. It's been replaced by the 342L, and they've removed the custom cockpit options. And lastly here for the minigun, they've added special options to decouple the minigun from the head camera view, and they've added inputs for keyboard joystick control of the minigun. They've added inputs for mouse control of the minigun, and they've also added clickables and inputs for minigun safety, sight, power, brightness, and the IR laser. So a pretty decent list of things there, and I'm sure that will please many of you with regards to just Polychop being still in the game. Of course, it doesn't answer any questions about the Kiowa, and I apologize, I don't have any more information on that. Hopefully that is something that we see this year as well in terms of an update and progress. I expect, given the work on the Gazelle, that they are still very much, up and running. It's 3 guys. We've seen quite a few updates over the last few months on the Kiowa, so on YouTube. So I think it's a project that's very much still alive. We're just going to have to be patient, like many of the modules in the game right now, before we get more information or we see some sort of update. So stay tuned is really all I can say. I'm excited. I love what they're doing here, and I'm looking forward to seeing if this aircraft is more fun to fly than what it currently is in its current guise. So let me know what you think of that. Stay tuned. Well, this brings us to the end of another DCS SITREP, another long one. Thank you, though, for tuning in. Thank you for supporting the channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It brings us closer to the 10,000 subscribers that we need for that giveaway that I'm planning here. If we hit that mark,
Let's rock!
let me know what you think of the MiG-17, the new radar developments, and also the Gazelle updates. Plus, we've got that new campaign, like I said, for the Huey, and it's receiving several updates, so plenty to talk about this week. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. And I'll leave you with a couple of shots here from some of the other developers who are working on things too here. We've got maps, and we've got aircraft, so yeah, lots to be excited about. All right, that'll do. Cheers.
Warning, AMAD, fire. Warning, AMAD, fire. Warning, engine, fire, left. Warning, engine, fire, left. Warning, engine, fire, right. Warning, engine, fire, right. AB burn through, left. AB burn through, left. AB burn through, right. AB burn through, right.